Hello, welcome to this presentation entitled Toward an Expanded Nzeb Platform with the subtitle of An Investigation into How the Existing Multiplicity of Low Energy Metrics Might Hinder or Benefit the Implementation of Nzeb Policy. My name is Martin Murray. I'm a PhD research student at Ulster University, and this is part of my preliminary research into my PhD, which basically is focusing on mixed use developments in urban settings, because I believe that these are absolutely critical in achieving our energy reduction and our CO2 reduction standards, which must be achieved by 2050. So as you can see, we have a wide variety of standards from BREEAM to WELL to LEED, right across Europe, with a multiplicity of reports, all of which are successful in their own right, but highly questionable as to whether they are achieving the standards we need to achieve. A 2016 review by the EU clearly indicates that we are not achieving the standards which we should be achieving, certainly under EU legislation and the Energy Performance of Building Directives, right away from 2002 all the way up to current times. So we need to address why this is. And it seems to me that it is because we are lacking ambition. We are lacking ambition as an industry, and we are building to not zero or nearly zero standards, whereas we should be building to net zero standards, standards which will still be relevant in 2050, rather than building to lower standards, which will have to be further renovated to avoid lock-in over the next 10 to 15 years. This opportunity for early movement is highly desirable because it creates space for us to improve our chances of keeping any level of degree change in terms of our climate to less than 1.5 degrees, all of which is reflective of the Paris Agreement of 2015. So it seems to be beyond debate at this stage that this is what we need to do. And yet we have an energy standard, Nzeb, which in effect is relative. And this is right across Europe because each national state has been allowed to set its own Nzeb standard. This one in Ireland is in fact relative. It's relative back to our standards in 2005 as opposed to being specific, which is what Passive House is. Passive House brings a clarity to the situation in that it addresses heating load and heating load minimized along with air tightness and fabric performance. So it's this level of accuracy that we need to get to. So it gives a level of clarity, and that clarity goes beyond the Nzeb reference to being cost driven, whereas Passive House in effect is fabric driven. It's a much more specific use. It's science, it's specific. Whereas Nzeb, under the legislation, has to be cost optimality. So it's trying to keep what is a fairly mediocre construction industry engaged with the process, as opposed to saying, well, actually, that standard is not good enough. We need to move on. And we need to move on because of our resources. Our resources that we put into achieving Nzeb, in many ways, is a moderate level of waste, and in particular of labour. Whereas Passive House, by bringing us to a standard which will stand the requirements of 2050, makes for a much more resilient use of resources, and that is where we need to be. It's undoubted that we are at passive. This is an example from a London project, Alder Grove, which has gone beyond passive and has concentrated in quite minute detail on heating and hot water energy, and has brought the energy standards right down for what is in effect both a social and independently owned housing development. And that's where we need to be. Whereas in the Republic of Ireland at the moment, we're dealing with U values reflective of an Nzeb standard, which is reflective in effect of the market and its market optimality, as opposed to energy optimality, which is basically dealing with Passive House. And in particular, Passive House Enerfit, because where we need to be in the years ahead relates to renovation. Renovation is the big challenge, and we need to move beyond the market at the moment. So at the moment in the Republic of Ireland, we have a market equilibrium. We have this energy balance between a decarbonised grid, which we are completely reliant upon, and an Nzeb software. Whereas the truth of the challenge lies in between. So we need to look at how we are addressing our supply grid and resources allocation. We need to look at embodied carbon, which is a major issue, and we need to look at planning use and carbon related to that use. So we need to break open this balance and look at how we allocate resources as if science matters. In regards to that, the activity domain, certainly in terms of clarity and my PhD research, deals with an Nzeb which is recalibrated, one that deals with case study metrics, embodied carbon, life cycle assessment, which means that we will move beyond cost optimality into a policy implementation which is efficient both in terms of resources, time and carbon usage. And that is, I think, beneficial to us as designers, as practicing architects and so on, because as designers we can control passive. We do it as designers, we can control air tightness, we can control building fabric, and we can control heating efficiencies. We can't control indoor temperatures, hours of heating, space heating and so on. So while and that leads to a great level of inaccuracy in terms of what we predict the energy use of buildings to be and what they eventually end up being. So by concentration on fabric, particularly in Northern European countries, we can really begin to address the accuracy of what we're trying to do and also the accuracy of an improved, broader platform of Nzeb. So in terms of a summary, we need a clarity in terms of Nzeb implementation with an increased optimality, and that will reflect itself in fabric. Our 2050 knowledge requires us to set this Nzeb implementation against carbon budgets. In other words, demolitions and so on will have to be justified according to our carbon budget and the time limitation that we have in effect for 30 years. And we will have to do this and review the energy performance building directives within the next 2 years. Thank you very much.